All right, hi friends. I'm going to record the beginning of part 2, and I'm not sure if I'm going to read 2 chapters or 3. We'll see how long it feels as I'm reading. But he just saw Isabel, and I think she saw him. So let's see what happens. Which was Isabel, part 3. Chapter 37. Saturday, February 14th, 1778. This is a quote from Olida Equano, mariner and former slave. He said, "I had thought only slavery dreadful, but the state of a free Negro appeared to me now equally so at least, and in some respects even worse, for they live in constant alarm for their liberty." Isabel studied me, and I her. She'd grown tall and didn't much look like a girl anymore. She wore a blue checked short gown over top of a homespun chemise and a grimy apron atop her black skirt. She wore the shoes on her feet that she'd worn when we escaped New York, which much scuffed now. A length of brown fabric was loosely wrapped below her chin, hiding her neck and covering her shoulders. A kerchief of the same color covered her hair. Bellingham looked at me, then at Isabel, then back to me. "Do you not remember her?" How much had she told him? If I pretended not to know her, he'd be suspicious. But if I admitted the truth, I might expose any lies that she had been forced to spin. I touched the swollen knot on my head. "My mind is still clouded, sir." "She was Lockton's girl," Bellingham said. "Lived on Wall Street." He stood up. "Mayhaps that guard hit you harder than I thought." "Now I recollect," I said. "She is much grown." "True enough." The din of stomping boots and loud voices in the front hall drew his attention. "Last," Bellingham began gathering up the papers in front of him. "Quick, Curzon, close up all the books with red leather bindings and stack them in the center of the table. Isabel, to the kitchen for wine. The wagon should be ready for you, but prepare the tray first." Isabel paused at the door that led to the kitchen and looked back at me. I could not tell what she made of any of this. "Hurry," ordered Bellingham. As she slipped out, 2 gentlemen entered from the hall, brushing snow from their wigs. They were congressmen, but I did not know their names. "You've returned early," Bellingham feigned delight with a false smile. The younger fellow shivered once. "A rider came from Albany with news. News about the scheme to unseat General Washington. Disrupted all of the business of the day. Total rot, of course." The older man dropped into a chair with a groan and wiped his nose on a handkerchief. "Is this your boy? He looks a bit worse for the wear." "There was a misunderstanding after the trial," Bellingham said. The younger gentleman pointed to the papers in Bellingham's hands. "Did you complete your study of the reports?" Bellingham set the papers down and straightened the cuffs of his shirt. I'd seen him do it countless times, always when he was about to shade the truth in his favor. "I want to go over the numbers again. The situation could be much worse than what anyone imagined." He plucked a paper from the center of the table. "These are the reports from Chester County." The gentleman with the damp nose held up his hands. "Not yet, James, please, some food first." Agreed. The younger congressman sat next to him. "Your boy won't serve table dress like that, will he?" "I should say not," Bellingham said. "He has an appointment with soap and clean clothes right now. You can go, Curzon," he said to me. I took 3 steps away from the table before he stopped me. "One moment," he called. "Have you forgotten how to take proper leave of your master?" That word "master" was a musket ball ripping through my guts. I almost bolted for the fireplace and grabbed that poker so I could brain him. They'd catch me, beat me, maybe kill me, but it would have been worth it. Except for Isabel. All 3 men stared at me, waiting. I stiffened my back, held my arms tight to my sides, and bowed low, silently cursing every man in the room. "Thank you, sir," I said as I again stood straight. "Will that be all?" It started to rain really hard, and I think it's probably hard to hear me reading, so I'm going to go inside. All right, chapter 38, Saturday, February 14th, 1778. This is a quote from Hannah Glass, The Art of Cookery, published in 1774. To make a calf's foot pie, first set 4 calves' feet in a saucepan in 3 quarts of water with 3 or 4 blades of mace. Let them boil softly till there is about a pint and a half. Then take out your feet, pick off the flesh from the bones, lay half in the dish. Strew half a pound of currants clean, washed and picked over, and half a pound of raisins softened. Bake it an hour and a half. I passed Gideon in the hall. He was carrying a tray of wine glasses and a bottle to the newly arrived gentleman. Pardon me, I started. Do you know, he walked past me without a word. The kitchen was crowded with so many tables, chairs, crates, and kegs that there was hardly room to turn around. The walls were filled with shelf after shelf of fat ceramic jars, green glass bottles, boxes for cutlery and spices, crockery plates and wooden bowls. Extra chairs hung from the hooks on the beams where wall met ceiling. 4 pots bubbled over the flames in the hearth, and the lid covering a massive pan peeked out from the heap of glowing coals. Most curious of all was the bird sitting in a cage on the table closest to the fire. It was the size of a small crow, but wore brilliantly colored yellow, green, and blue feathers, and was possessed of a ferocious beak it was using to open a walnut. An old white woman came out of the pantry carrying a smoked ham. I bowed hastily. Good day, ma'am. Can you tell me where I can find Isabel, Mr. Bellingham's maid? That one? She heaved the ham onto a board and limped to the other side of the room. What do you want her for? I stammered, to become better acquainted with my duties. Here. The woman grunted, pulled a stool over to the shelves, and climbed up onto it, her limbs shaking. I rushed over before she fell. May I please help, ma'am? She studied me, her blue eyes clouded with age. I need that knife box up there. Of course. She put out a hand so I could help her safely find the ground and watched as I took down the box and set it by the ham. That Isabel, she took a large knife from the box. The wagon just took her back to headquarters. They needed a maid to help with something. She sliced off a bit of the ham and tossed it in the cage. The bird snatched the meat in its beak, then gave a low whistle. Cheeky devil, she said to the creature. Mr. Bellingham hired her out? Hires her out every chance he gets. This camp has too many gentlefolk and not enough servants. Pull down a plate for me, will you? And a bowl. She piled ham slices on the plate I handed her, then gave it back to me. Eat. A toothless smile softened her direct manner of speech. She did not have to say it twice. I sat, grabbed a fork, speared a piece of the meat, and stuffed it into my mouth. The taste was indescribable, but better than that was the satisfying sensation of swallowing, and then the luxury of another and another and another piece waiting on my plate. I imagine you'll be hired out too, she said, after you've had a bath. Are you useful at all? Do you have a trade? The artisans are desperate, I hear, especially the gunsmiths. She filled the bowl with soup from a pot hanging over the fire and set it next to my plate. Could the key to our escape be so easy? Wait until we are hired out to the same house and then run? When will Isabel return? I asked. She continued slicing and chuckled. Lads find love in the strangest places. No, ma'am, I said, my face suddenly hot. It's just, don't you worry none. She reached across the table and patted the back of my hand. I raised 8 sons and a score of grandsons. Know a few things about lads, I do. Your secret's safe with me. My mouth opened, but for the life of me, I could not think of a lie. The colorful bird gave a tremendous squawk, as if laughing at my discomfort. Shush now, Mrs. Cook tossed another, more ham into the cage. Keep up that noise and I'll bake you in a pie, I swear. I seized upon the interruption to direct the old lady's attention away from Isabel. If I may, ma'am, what manner of bird is that? My son William claims it's a parrot. Won it in a card game he did. Says I ought call it King George so he can order it about when the war is over. She gave the soup over the fire a stir. William is a fine card player. Lord forgive him. Have you heard of him? William Farnsworth Cook of the 5th Pennsylvania Regiment. Blasted fool's too old to be in the army, but he won't listen to his mother or his wife. I wiped my mouth. Are there many parrots in Pennsylvania? She laughed at that. Goodness, no. The sailor who lost the card game came across it in some heathenish place. She limped back to the table and picked up her knife again. Ought to be grateful. Imagine if my William had won himself an elephant. Where would I fit a creature like that in my kitchen? All right, so I am going to read one more. Chapter 39. Sunday, February 15th to Wednesday, February 18th, 1778. This is Venture Smith's Rotier Furrow, description of stopping a beating by his Long Island owner. She took down her horsewhip, and while she was glutting her fury with it, I reached out my great black hand, raised it up, and received the blows of the whip on which were designed for my head. I immediately committed the whip to the devouring fire. Isabel was a puzzlement in the days that followed. When our paths crossed, she would not look at me. I'd say, "Hello, country," or "Good day, Isabel," but she acted deaf. At first I thought she was being sensible, that there were dangers for us both if we talked freely in front of others. The kitchen always overflowed with people. Mrs. Cook, Gideon, the Moore family, who owned this house and were reduced to living in one bedchamber, plus any number of messengers and junior officers coming from or headed to the camp. I told myself she was just waiting for the right moment. By the third day, however, I began to worry that she'd suffered a brain fever. We passed each other in the hall without another person in earshot, and still she ignored my greeting. I followed her back into the kitchen that time, intent on forcing a conversation, but Gideon was waiting for her, holding the tall rack of bells that he pulled out when readying the wagon to take Isabel for another day of hired-out work. "I beg your pardon, miss," I said with care, for Gideon stared openly at us. "Do you suffer from an affliction of the ears?" Isabel tied on a bonnet, pulled on a red cloak and knitted mittens, then walked out the door without answering me. Gideon smirked and gave a little laugh that made me want to punch his face. Gideon only spoke to me when he was complaining about my work or giving me a new task to do. Though we ate most meals together, worked side by side, and slept on the floor of the bake-oven shed, he never conversated with me like a normal fellow. In the daytime, he ignored my questions. At night, he'd lay himself down and go straight to sleep, or at least pretend to. A peculiar egg, Mrs. Cook called him. Gideon's master, the congressman in York, who had loaned him to the committee, was one of the richest men in the South, according to the old woman. He owned 400 slaves who worked his fields of rice and tobacco. Gideon was as trusted as General Washington's manservant, Billy Lee, but was said to be twice as clever. "He speaks the French and the Italian," Mrs. Cook gossiped. "Learned it when he went over the seas with his master." I did not think this was much of an accomplishment, and heartily wished that his master would recall him to York, or send him to Italy. Anything to keep his sneering face away from me and Isabel. Gideon treated me like a useless piece of furniture, but when it came to Isabel, he was all false kindness and flattery. Because she was so young and unfamiliar with the world, she encouraged his attentions. These circumstances gave even more urgency to my plans of escape. I pondered how we could run away day and night, when to run, where to run, how to avoid recapture. Spring was the most likely time, after the snow had melted, but before the army marched into battle. We ought wait for a confusion-filled day so we could be miles away before our absence was noted. But waiting brought danger, too. Bellingham and the congressman could soon return to York, where our chance would be much dimmer. He could decide to sell one or both of us because he was short of coin. My doubts and convictions fought back and forth. Run now. Wait for the right moment. Run while we still can. Wait to gather information and strength. But when the gentleman discussed the birthday ball being thrown for His Excellency General George Washington, this decision was made for me. I did not sleep the night I heard the news. Gideon snored like a well-fed hog, and the sound of it made me heartily miss all the fellows in my hut. It also helped me keep me awake as I waited for Isabel to come outside to use the privy. I prayed that she did not have a chamber pot. The hinges of the kitchen door squeaked just before the sun rose. I peered out the shed door just in time to see her enter the privy. 'Twas a cold morning. She did not tarry long. I stood at the kitchen door and put a finger to my lips when she returned, then followed her inside. Isabel walked to the hearth and poked at the fire. "Say your piece," she said bluntly. "Pardon me?" She stuck a twist of paper into the flames. "You've been itching to holler at me since you got here. I'll keep working whilst you bluster on. Mrs. Cook likes everything to be ready when she comes downstairs." She lit 2 candles with the burning twist and tossed it into the fireplace. "Just don't expect me to apologize." "I'm not going to bluster or holler, and I don't want an apology." "I don't have time for lies or foolishness," she said. Would you please be quiet for one moment?" I walked over to her and whispered, "I can get us out of here." Okay, so there's that. I know it seems like a lot, but I think you can do it. 3 chapters, and we will discuss them tomorrow. Thanks.